Greg and Altair took refuge in a cave network, away from the eyes of enemy scouts and drones. As the two settled in, I took the chance to explain the fraught history between our two peoples. Our initial encounter with the Vorkarians was not a peaceful one, far from it. What should have been a momentous first contact instead spiraled into a devastating misunderstanding. A simple translation error during those initial communications led both sides to assume the worst about the other's intentions. Fear and mistrust ignited tensions, which quickly erupted into all-out war. The conflict raged for years, spanning a dozen star systems. Millions perished in the fighting, on the battlefield, and caught in the crossfire. Entire cities were reduced to rubble. Both sides committed atrocities, driven by hate and xenophobia. It remains the darkest chapter in both our histories. Greg himself served in the war as a young soldier. He still carried scars from plasma burns on his torso and far deeper wounds within. An entire generation was traumatized by the horrors they witnessed. An uneasy ceasefire was eventually called, but true peace remained elusive. Reconciliation felt impossible with so much blood spilled. Even half a century later, many on both sides still harbored deep resentment and suspicion. The Vorkarian Civil War, with some factions seeking rearmament and a return to hostilities, was clear evidence of that. Inside the cave, Greg tended to Altair's wounds as best he could with the supplies in his field kit. Though Vorkarian biology was distinctly alien, he couldn't help but notice certain striking anatomical similarities: analogous musculature, circulatory systems, organ structures. They were more alike than they were different. Altair stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She tensed at the sight of Greg leaning over her, mandibles clicking in agitation. Greg raised his hands and backed away slowly, trying to convey that he meant no harm. Altair watched him warily for a long moment, then glanced down at the gel packs and synth skin patches covering her injuries. Realization seemed to dawn. She relaxed fractionally and inclined her head, a gesture of grudging gratitude. Greg returned to her side and resumed his ministrations, hyper-aware of his patient's guarded scrutiny. He knew her wariness was justified, given their people's acrimonious past. Trust would have to be earned. With no common language between them, they were forced to communicate with improvised sign language and crude drawings scratched into the dirt. Progress was halting, but they slowly started to understand one another. Greg learned that Altair was no ordinary soldier. She was a high-ranking diplomat and had been en route to a secret summit between Vorkarian factions. The gathering was meant to be a last desperate attempt to find a path to peace before the civil war consumed their world. Altair was the key negotiator, the only figure respected enough by all sides to broker a truce. But someone had betrayed her to the rebels. Her transport had been ambushed and shot down. Without her, the summit would collapse, and with it any hope for peace. As he listened to her story, Greg found himself captivated by Altair's unwavering conviction. Even in the face of overwhelming odds and catastrophic setbacks, she remained committed to her mission of peace. Her idealism was like a light in the darkness, undimmed by the grim reality of their situation. He'd grown so jaded over the years, so mired in old grudges and fatalistic thinking. But in Altair's conviction and selfless resolve, Greg saw an echo of his younger self, the idealistic soldier who once believed in the possibility of lasting peace between their peoples, no matter how high the cost. He saw perhaps a personal shot at redemption. It's worth noting the parallels between Altair's struggle and humanity's own history. Our species has known its share of ruinous conflicts: the world wars, the unification revolts, the Centauri rebellions. We too once teetered on the brink of self-annihilation, consumed by divisions and ancient hatreds. It was only through visionaries who dared to champion peace and unity, despite overwhelming opposition, that we found our way back from that precipice. Visionaries like Altair, whose shining ideals relight the path and remind us what we're truly fighting for. As the hours crept by, a bond slowly formed between the two castaways, a budding sense of mutual respect and understanding. The more they shared, the more they realized how alike they truly were beneath the surface. The same hopes, the same fears, the same dreams for a better tomorrow. The moment was shattered by a shrill ping from Greg's proximity alert. He whirled to see a rebel scout, drone hovering at the mouth of the cave, its sensors already sweeping over them. Greg snatched up his pulse rifle and squeezed off a shot, but too late. The drone darted away, its transmission light blinking. Their position had been compromised. Altair was already on her feet, scooping up what meager supplies they had. Greg could hear shouts echoing from the tunnel behind them. Shadows flickered on the walls, growing longer. The rebels were closing fast. No choice. Greg grabbed Altair's hand and pulled her deeper into the labyrinthine dark of the cave system, praying to any gods that would listen that these tunnels had another exit. If not, they were about to be trapped in a pitch-black tomb with a small army of hostiles bearing down on them. It would be a harrowing trial of survival that would push them both to their limits, and either forge an unbreakable bond between them, or shatter the fragile trust they'd begun to build. Their desperate flight through the tunnels quickly turned into a grueling trial of endurance. Greg's hard-won experience from his years as a soldier proved invaluable as he guided them through the winding labyrinth, always managing to stay one step ahead of the rebel search parties. Altair's knowledge of Vorkarian geology, gleaned from her royal education, helped them navigate the more treacherous passages. But as the hours dragged on, exhaustion and dwindling supplies began to take their toll. Tempers frayed as they rationed the last of their water and nutrient packs. Altair's wounds, though field-dressed, began to slow her down. Greg shouldered more and more of her weight, but his own strength was flagging. They came to a narrow choke point in the tunnels, a perfect spot for an ambush. Greg made the agonizing call to stay behind and buy Altair time to escape. "You have to go on," Greg pleaded in broken Vorkarian. "Your peace summit, your people need you." Altair shook her head vehemently, mandibles clicking in distress. She gestured between them, then clasped his hand tight. The message was clear. We go together, or not at all. But Greg was adamant. He pushed her ahead, then turned to face the tunnel behind them, pulse rifle at the ready. Altair hesitated, then reluctantly slipped away into the shadows of a side passage. She would not abandon him completely. The rebels came in a rush, a tide of muzzle flashes and pulse beams in the dark. Greg met them with calm precision, his aim steady and true. One by one they fell, but there were always more to take their place. A searing bolt took Greg in the shoulder, spinning him around. Another punched through his side in a spray of blood. He sank to one knee, breath coming in ragged gasps, but still he fought on. At last, a rifle butt to the temple sent him sprawling. The rebel leader stepped forward, a dark figure haloed in the glow of muzzle energy, and leveled his gun at Greg's head. Only to jerk and crumple as a plasma bolt took him through the faceplate. Altair exploded from cover, coruscating energy blade in each hand. She moved like quicksilver, a deadly blur weaving through the rebel lines. Where had a diplomat learned to fight like that? The casual ease with which she employed the complex Vorkarian martial arts spoke of a lifetime of intensive training. Of course, and as a royal heir, she would have been schooled in combat from a young age. The rebels, caught totally off guard, fell in droves before her onslaught. Altair was a maelstrom of desperate fury, the last of her strength poured into this final defiant stand. Grievously wounded, she fought with the implacable resolve of one who had nothing left to lose. In the end, it was enough. The few surviving rebels fled into the tunnels. Altair, slick with blood, some of it hers, limped to Greg's side and dragged him back from the brink. The irony was lost on neither of them, that she was now saving him with the same field medicine techniques he had used to treat her wounds. The teacher had become the student, the rescued, now the rescuer. That was the way of things in war. Amid the fire and the fury, the most unlikely bonds could be forged. Altair managed to stabilize Greg's wounds, but he remained in dire straits, wavering on the knife's edge between life and death. She fashioned a crude stretcher from rebel armor plating and wrapped him in salvaged thermocloaks. With no other recourse, she took up the stretcher and forged on into the tunnels. Praying to ancestors she scarcely believed in, that an exit would reveal itself before Greg slipped away. As I watched them vanish into that fathomless abyss, I couldn't help but reflect on the indomitable tenacity of life, in all its myriad forms. The sheer strength of will it takes to push on in the face of such insurmountable odds, spurred on by nothing more than the burning need to save another. It's a force that can't be quantified or contained, the best and perhaps only hope for us all. Days stretched into an endless blur as Altair and Greg trudged through the labyrinthine tunnels. With each passing hour, Greg's strength waned, his wounds taking their toll. Altair shouldered more of his weight, jaw set with steely resolve, refusing to let her newfound ally succumb. At last they emerged into a primordial forest, a place untouched by Vorkarian civilization for eons. I recognized it immediately, the Arborwood, a vast expanse of ancient trees sacred to the Vorkarian people. Altair too seemed to know this place. She paused, mandibles clicking in reverence before forging ahead with renewed purpose. Greg's condition was dire. Blood seeped through makeshift bandages, his breathing labored and skin ashen. Altair scanned the forest, searching desperately for aid, for some glimmer of hope. What she found instead was a hidden rebel outpost, nestled at the fringe of the tree line. A plan formed, born of desperation and unyielding resolve. With Greg hidden safely away, Altair crept through the shadows, a wraith in the night. She slipped past outer sentries with preternatural grace, dispatching guards with ruthless efficiency. In mere minutes the outpost was hers. She raided precious medical supplies, field dressings and stim injectors, anything to keep Greg from slipping away, but it was the intel she uncovered that shook her to the core. Intercepted transmissions painted a grim picture. The rebel leader Zorax, a sadistic warlord without conscience or mercy, had staged a coup in the chaos following Altair's disappearance. The royal family, Altair's own blood, assassinated, all of them. And Zorax had laid the blame squarely at humanity's feet. Vorkarian public opinion, already balancing on a razor's edge, had tipped towards all-out war. Zorax's final ploy was to capture Altair herself and force a public denunciation of the humans, shattering any last hope for peace between their kinds. A single spark to ignite the inferno. Altair's world shattered. Her family, those she had fought so hard to save, gone, ripped away in a senseless instant. The weight of it threatened to crush her, to drown her in sorrow so deep and dark there could be no surfacing. But a spark glowed within that abyss, small at first but growing. Her family was gone, but their dream endured, carried now in her. She would not let their deaths be in vain. Humanity, Greg. They were not to blame. Only Zorax, and he would pay. Greg saw the shift in her, steel forged in the heart of grief. He clasped her hand, meeting her gaze with fire to match her own. "We stop him," Greg said, "a vow and a covenant, whatever it takes." Altair bent over the outpost console, mandibles flying over keys. A coded transmission to her loyalists, warning of Zorax's treachery, beseeching them to resist. They had to know the truth before it was too late. In the days that followed, the unlikely pair waged a guerrilla war unlike any in Vorkarian history. Striking from the shadows, fading like ghosts, only to reappear and strike again. Greg, pushing past the pain, taught Altair the arts of human warfare, weapons and tactics Zorax would never see coming. Supply lines ruptured, command posts lay in ruin, rebel soldiers defected in droves. And whispers began to spread, whispers of a fearsome Terran warrior fighting alongside the princess, defending Vorkarian and human alike. Some even claimed he was the princess's sworn shield, bound to her by a sacred oath. How quickly the narrative had changed, the enemy invader becoming the selfless hero. Zorax flew into a rage at the news. He placed a colossal bounty on Greg's head, naming him an enemy of the Vorkarian state, an honor reserved for only the most notorious adversaries. Greg just laughed when he heard. "Seems I finally earned a promotion," he quipped, slotting a fresh plasma cell into his rifle. As I watched them from afar, I marveled at the turns a life could take. A human soldier, once a sworn enemy, now fighting and bleeding for a people not his own. A Vorkarian princess raised to rule, now battling in the mud to save a world that had all but turned against her. The lines that had once seemed so clear, so immutable, had begun to blur. Human and Vorkarian, friend and foe, right and wrong, in the crucible of crisis, such distinctions had a way of melting away, leaving only the raw, unfiltered struggle to survive, to protect, to hope. And Greg and Altair had become the living embodiment of that struggle, their fates now inextricably intertwined. Two lost souls who had found in each other a kindred spirit, a reason to fight on when all seemed lost. The road ahead would be long, and perilous beyond imagining. Zorax would not rest until the Terran warrior and the rebel princess lay dead at his feet. The survival of both their species, the very dream of peace itself, would depend on the strength of the bond they had forged in the heart of darkness. But for now they had each other, and a renewed sense of purpose burning bright within. The once clear lines had blurred, and in that blurring, something new and profound had taken shape. Something that just might have the power to change the course of history itself. The princess and her paladin fought on, into an uncertain future, carrying the flame of hope against an ever-darkening night. The latest development in Greg and Altair's quest came as a bolt from the blue. A splinter faction of Vorkarians, disillusioned with both the tyrannical Zorax and the crumbling monarchy, made contact with a startling revelation. They had captured a human diplomatic envoy sent by Earth to negotiate Altair's safe return. It seemed Earth had gotten wind of Greg's heroic actions alongside the Vorkarian princess, and, sensing an opportunity, dispatched the envoy to broker a ceasefire and extract their wayward soldier. But the splinter faction had other ideas. They believed Altair and Greg represented a third path, a chance to forge a new Vorkarian government free from the rot of the old institutions. The faction offered a deal, release the human envoy unharmed in exchange for a face-to-face meeting with their leadership. Greg, ever the cautious soldier, urged Altair to refuse. It smelled like a trap. But Altair, ever the idealist, saw a glimmer of hope, a chance to build a coalition for peace. Against Greg's warnings, she agreed to the meeting. The rendezvous took place in the heart of the primeval forest, under a canopy of towering trees older than memory. The air crackled with tension as Altair and Greg approached the splinter faction's camp, ringed by grim-faced warriors bristling with weapons. The faction's leader, a battle-scarred veteran named Kresk, wasted no time with pleasantries. "Princess Altair," he rumbled, "we have watched your campaign against Zorax with great interest. You fight with honor and courage, rare commodities in these dark times." Altair inclined her head, mandibles clicking in a cautious greeting. "Your words are kind, Kresk, but why have you brought us here? What is it you want?" Kresk leaned forward, eyes glinting. "The same thing you want, Princess. An end to this senseless bloodshed, a new beginning for our people." Greg shifted uneasily, hand drifting towards his holstered sidearm. "And how exactly do you propose to achieve that?" "With this," Kresk gestured, and his warriors parted to reveal a hulking, thrumming device hovering on a gravitic sled. "Behold, the salvation of the Vorkarian race and the damnation of its enemies." Altair recoiled as if struck. Is that a Starkiller? A planet cracker bomb? But those were all destroyed after the war. The treaties forbade... "The treaties," spat Kresk, "were a farce. While the politicians preached peace, our scientists labored in secret to perfect the ultimate weapon, a device capable of shattering entire star systems." Kresk nodded grimly. "And any who would oppose him. With this power he will be unstoppable." He turned to Altair, eyes burning with fervor. "Which is why we must strike first. Take the weapon, Princess. Use it to crush Zorax and his followers. Wipe the slate clean, so we may begin anew." Altair wavered, the temptation of such power warring with her principles. She glanced to Greg, and in his haunted eyes saw the spectre of the horrors they had both witnessed, the scars they still bore from the last war. And in that moment, her path was clear. "No," she said softly but with steel in her voice. "I will not become what I fight against. I will not visit such destruction on anyone, even my enemies. There must be another way." Kresk's face contorted with rage, and for a terrible instant, Greg thought he would order his warriors to attack. But then, to their shock, the rebel leader threw back his head and laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed through the trees. "Well said, Princess. Well said indeed." He grinned, a fierce, approving smile. "Yours was a test of character, and you have passed with flying colors. You are truly worthy to lead our people into a new age." He stepped forward and, in a gesture that sent shockwaves through the assembled warriors, bent the knee before Altair. "My sword and my life are yours, Princess. Command me." One by one, the other rebels followed suit, until the entire clearing was filled with kneeling figures, a scene out of legend. Altair stood tall among them, a queen in all but name, while Greg watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation. And so a new alliance was forged, a rebel army rallying to Altair's banner. Kresk's followers brought word of secret tunnels beneath Zorax's mountain stronghold, a hidden way to strike at the very heart of the enemy. Together, Altair and Greg planned a final, daring assault, a surgical strike to capture Zorax and end his reign of terror once and for all. But even as they laid their plans, a shadow hung over them, the looming spectre of the Starkiller. They knew that even if they succeeded, even if they overthrew Zorax, the threat would remain as long as that terrible technology existed. It was a sword of Damocles, hanging over the fate of worlds. In a moment of quiet before the storm, Altair and Greg made a solemn pact. No matter the outcome of the coming battle, no matter the cost, they would find that Starkiller, and they would destroy it. They would scour every last trace of it from the universe, so that never again could such a horror be unleashed. It was a heavy burden they took upon themselves that day, a sacred charge. But as I watched these two unlikely heroes standing side by side, human and Vorkarian, united by a bond forged in the crucible of war, I knew that if anyone could bear the weight of such a responsibility, it was them. The coming battle would be the crucible in which the future of two species, the very fate of the galaxy itself, would be decided. And at the heart of that maelstrom would stand Altair and Greg, the rebel princess and her Terran paladin, carrying the hopes of billions on their shoulders. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion, and as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, heralding the fateful day to come, I couldn't help but wonder if it was an omen of hope, or the pale illumination of the coming flames that would consume us all. The final assault on Zorax's mountain stronghold was a maelstrom of fire and fury, a battle to eclipse all others. Altair and Greg fought at the vanguard of the rebel forces, human and Vorkarian side by side, united by a bond forged in the crucible of shared struggle. They carved a path of destruction through the warlord's defenses, an unstoppable force driven by righteous fury and unbreakable resolve. At last they cornered Zorax in his command sanctum, a vast chamber pulsing with malevolent energies. The warlord stood at its center, a looming figure bristling with cruel cybernetics and pulsing with an eerie, sickly glow. With a gesture, his flesh parted, revealing the thrumming heart of the Starkiller embedded in his chest. He had already integrated the terrible weapon into his own twisted biology, becoming a living engine of apocalypse. Greg reacted on pure instinct, tackling Zorax in a desperate bid to buy Altair a precious few seconds. They grappled in a titanic clash, Greg's raw strength pitted against Zorax's augmented might. The very air crackled with energy as they struggled, the Starkiller's power building to a crescendo. In a burst of blinding speed, Altair lunged, her plasma blade sinking to the hilt in Zorax's back. The warlord howled in agony, his scream rising to a deafening shriek as the energies consuming him reached critical mass. With a final defiant roar, Zorax unleashed a cataclysmic pulse that seared across the chamber in a blinding wave of annihilation. Greg shoved Altair clear an instant before it struck him head-on, hurling his broken body across the room to crumple against the far wall like a discarded rag doll. The pulse ripped through the stronghold's foundations, sending tons of stone and metal crashing down in a roaring avalanche. Altair staggered to Greg's side, heedless of the destruction raining down around them. She dragged his limp form free of the debris, every muscle screaming with the effort, as the citadel collapsed in on itself like a dying star. They burst from the disintegrating gates just as the rebel forces stormed the courtyard, the stronghold vanishing into a churning whirlpool of dust and rubble behind them. Victory was theirs, but the cost had been dear. Greg lay unmoving in Altair's arms, his pulse a thready flutter beneath her desperate fingers. Vorkarian medics swarmed to their side, but even their most advanced technology could only delay the inevitable. The human had absorbed the full brunt of the Starkiller's energies, and they were ravaging him from within like a horde of ravenous parasites. As Altair kept vigil over Greg's failing form, grim tidings arrived from the rebel leadership. In Zorax's final moments, the Starkiller had fired off a quantum-entangled distress beacon, carrying a dire warning to the far reaches of the cosmos, and something had heard its call. In the uncharted void beyond the galactic fringe, an ancient race stirred from eons of slumber. The progenitors, the eldest of the elder races, the creators of the Starkiller technology in a time before time. They had long since abandoned this galaxy, deeming the younger races unworthy inheritors of their legacy. But the Starkiller's activation could mean only one thing. Their creations had been perverted, turned to base destruction and petty conquest. It was a sin that could not go unanswered. The progenitors would return to the galaxy, to scourge away the taint of the unworthy, to reclaim what was theirs by right, and all who stood in their way would face annihilation. As the Vorkarian medics fought to stabilize Greg, a radical proposal took shape, to infuse the human with Vorkarian DNA, granting him the regenerative abilities needed to overcome the Starkiller's ravages. It was a desperate gamble, one that had never been attempted. The risks were incalculable. At best, Greg would become something new, something neither fully human nor Vorkarian. At worst, the process would kill him outright, or leave him a twisted abomination. But with the progenitors bearing down on the galaxy, and time slipping away like sand through a shattered hourglass, what choice did they have? Altair gathered the greatest minds of her people, geneticists, xenobiologists, quantum surgeons, and tasked them with the impossible. They would remake Greg, forge him anew in the crucible of science and desperation, or lose him forever to the howling dark. As the Vorkarian scientists labored frantically, and the rebel fleet braced for the coming storm, I couldn't help but reflect on the sheer magnitude of the events unfolding before me. Two species, once sworn enemies, now stood on the precipice of a new chapter, one of unity and common purpose in the face of an existential threat. And Greg, the human soldier, now lay at the heart of that nascent alliance. His very being would be reshaped, redefined, to become a living bridge between human and Vorkarian. It was a moment of transformation, of transcendence, laden with both dread and breathtaking potential. The progenitors were coming, ancient and implacable, to reap a terrible harvest. The galaxy trembled on the brink of cataclysm, the future shrouded in shadow and sorrow. But in that darkness, a new light kindled, the light of hope, of defiant unity against the rising tide of oblivion. The die had been cast, the chain of destiny forged link by painful link. What would be born in the coming crucible? What manner of being would rise from the ashes of the old order? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. With no other choice left to them, Altair and the Vorkarian scientists made the fateful decision to proceed with the radical infusion of Vorkarian DNA into Greg's ravaged body. It was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to save the human soldier who had become so much more, a symbol of hope, a bridge between worlds. I watched as they prepped the operating theatre, the air electric with tension. Greg lay at the center, his life hanging by the thinnest of threads. The Vorkarian surgeons, the greatest minds of their generation, gathered around him, their focus laser-sharp. The procedure stretched on for hours that felt like eternities, each second an agony of uncertainty. But as the final strand was spliced into place, a miracle unfolded before our eyes. Greg's vitals, so long faded to the barest whisper, surged with newfound strength. His wounds, the terrible burns and gashes that had pushed him to the brink of oblivion, began to knit themselves together, regenerating at a pace that defied belief. Against all odds, against every prediction of failure, they had done it. The infusion was a success. But the true impact of what had been done would not become clear until Greg finally awoke. His eyes snapped open, and in an instant it was clear he was changed, transformed on a level none of us could have anticipated. His gaze held a new intensity, his bearing a coiled power waiting to be unleashed. He rose from the operating table, and as his feet touched the ground, the Vorkarian medic surrounding him fell back in astonishment. For as he took in the room, as his eyes found Altair's, the words that left his mouth were not in his native tongue, but in flawless Vorkarian. The implications crashed over us like a tidal wave. The DNA infusion had not just granted Greg a Vorkarian's regenerative abilities, it had fundamentally altered his brain chemistry, his neural pathways. He could understand, could speak the Vorkarian language, as if he had been born to it. In that moment, the true depth of what had been done hit home. Greg was no longer fully human, but neither was he Vorkarian. He was something new, something unprecedented. A fusion of two worlds, a living bridge between species. I could see the weight of it settle on his shoulders, the realization of just how much had changed. There was a newfound connection to Altair, to the Vorkarian people, but also a profound sense of alienation from his own humanity. It was a struggle that would define him in the days to come, as the repercussions of his transformation rippled out across the stars. For even as Greg grappled with his new identity, the galaxy was quaking with a fear unseen in eons. The news of the progenitor's return spread like wildfire, each whispered rumor and panicked transmission fueling a growing sense of dread. The great powers, so confident in their dominance, now trembled at the prospect of this ancient might re-emerging to reclaim what was once theirs. In a last desperate bid for unity, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session, a gathering of the mightiest species and factions known to the cosmos. Yet even here, in the heart of galactic governance, fractures began to form. There were those who sought capitulation, arguing that to stand against the progenitors was to court annihilation, that only by prostrating themselves before these returning gods could they hope to survive. But there were others, led by the hawkish factions, who saw surrender as tantamount to enslavement. They beat the drums of war, calling for a united stand, a marshalling of arms not seen since the great conflicts of eons past. As the debate raged, as the very pillars of galactic order threatened to crumble, an unexpected lifeline emerged from the shadows. Altair, sequestered with Greg as he recuperated, received a clandestine transmission from an untraceable source, a message claiming to hold the key to the progenitors' undoing, the secret to their defeat. The sender refused to reveal themselves, citing the need for utmost secrecy. Instead, they provided coordinates to a remote, uninhabited world on the galaxy's fringe, far from prying eyes. There, they promised, the truth would be revealed. It was an offer steeped in mystery and danger, a siren's call that could just as easily lead to ruin as salvation. But for Greg and Altair, hardened by battles past and driven by a duty that transcended species, there was no choice at all. And so they prepared for one final mission, a journey into the unknown with the fate of galaxies resting on their shoulders. As I watched their ship pierce the veil of stars, I couldn't help but ponder the twisting path that had led them here. A human and a Vorkarian, once sworn enemies, now bound by a connection that defied the very boundaries of their species. Forged in the crucible of war, tempered by loss and sacrifice, they had emerged as something new, something profound. The secrets they carried, the revelations that awaited them, These could be the key to a future unbound by the ancient enmities of the past. Or they could be the final death knell, the harbinger of an apocalypse unseen in the history of the cosmos. As the ship dwindled to a mote against the infinite black, I found myself whispering a prayer to beings I scarcely believed in, a prayer that the path they walked would lead not into darkness, but to a new dawn for us all. Colossal craters pockmarked the surface, some stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Jagged spires of twisted metal jutted from the rubble, the skeletal remains of gargantuan war machines. It was a landscape frozen in time, a monument to an apocalyptic conflict fought eons ago. "By the gods," Altair breathed, her voice hushed with awe and horror. "What happened here?" I knew the answer, of course. This was the site of the final battle between the progenitors and the only other species to ever challenge their galactic supremacy. The war had been devastating, the casualties unimaginable. In the end, the progenitors had emerged victorious, but at a staggering cost. They'd never fully recovered from the Pyrrhic victory. Greg set the ship down at the edge of a yawning chasm that had once been a mighty fortress. As the ramp lowered, they stepped out into the eerie stillness, the only sound the howling of the wind through the ruins. "Stay sharp," Greg murmured, his hand resting on the hilt of his plasma saber. "We don't know what's waiting for us out here." They picked their way through the debris field, every sense on high alert. Altair's scanner swept back and forth, searching for any sign of their contact. Minutes ticked by with no readings, and the unease grew. Just as Greg was about to suggest they pull back, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He spun, weapon leaping into his hand, only to freeze at the sight before him. A cloaked figure emerged from the shadows of a toppled war machine, its form shimmering and indistinct. It seemed to float rather than walk, gliding across the rubble with eerie grace. Greg kept his saber trained on the stranger, wariness etched in every line of his body. "You're the one who contacted us? How do you know our names?" The figure inclined its head. "I know a great deal about you both. I have been watching your species for a very long time." It reached up and pushed back its hood, revealing a featureless silver mask. "I am an artificial construct, a fusion of progenitor and Vordrax technology. I am the last remnant of the civilization that once stood against the progenitors." Altair gasped, her eyes widening. The Vordrax were little more than a myth, a cautionary tale whispered among the stars. To be confronted with a living relic of their existence was staggering. "Why did you reach out to us?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" The AI was silent for a long moment, as if gathering its thoughts. When it spoke again, there was a new weight to its words. "For eons, I have watched the younger races of this galaxy repeat the same patterns of conflict and self-annihilation that doomed my creators. War after war, cycle after cycle, with no end in sight. And now, with the progenitor's return, I fear that history is poised to repeat itself on a cataclysmic scale." It turned its inscrutable gaze on Altair and Greg, and there was something almost like compassion in its voice. "But you two, you are different. The bond between you transcends the barriers of species and culture. In your unity, in your capacity for understanding and compassion, I see a glimmer of hope, a chance, perhaps, to break the cycle at last." Greg shook his head, struggling to process the enormity of the AI's words. "What do you expect us to do? We're just two soldiers, caught up in events bigger than ourselves. How can we possibly make a difference against the might of the progenitors?" "By striking at their greatest vulnerability." The AI gestured, and a shimmering hologram sprang to life in the air before them. It depicted the galaxy, with dozens of pulsing red points scattered throughout. The progenitors are linked by a vast network of quantum communication nodes, relays that allow their hive mind to coordinate across stellar distances. If these nodes can be disabled or destroyed, it will throw their forces into disarray, rendering them vulnerable. Altair studied the map, her tactician's mind already racing. "But the nodes will be heavily defended. The progenitors won't let their weakness be exploited so easily." "No," the AI agreed. They will fight with everything they have to protect the nodes, but with the element of surprise and the right strike team, it may be possible. It is a desperate gamble, but it may be our only chance. Greg and Altair exchanged a long-waited look. They both knew the stakes, the risks they'd be taking on, but in that moment, staring into each other's eyes, they also knew that there was no other choice. "All right," Greg said at last, his voice ringing with resolve. "We're in. Give us the coordinates." The gears of fate began to turn. Altair and Greg relayed the AI's intelligence to the Galactic Council, and a desperate plan took shape. Strike teams comprised of the most skilled warriors and technicians from a dozen species were hastily assembled, each one tasked with assaulting a different communication node. But the central node, the linchpin of the entire network, would require a special touch. Located in the heart of progenitor space, it was the most heavily fortified target of all. This was the mission Altair and Greg took upon themselves, the burden of the ages weighing upon their shoulders. As the strike force gathered for their final briefing, a somber air hung over the proceedings. Every being in that room knew the odds, knew in their hearts that many of them would not return. It was a knowledge that bound them together, human and Vulcarian, and 100 other species, united in the face of annihilation. In a quiet moment before the assault, Altair found Greg in his quarters, staring out at the stars with a pensive expression. She slipped her hand into his, their fingers intertwining, and he turned to face her. "It's been a hell of a ride, hasn't it?" he murmured, a ghost of a smile playing over his lips. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here, about to go to war alongside a Vulcarian princess, I would have called them mad," Altair finished, her own smile mirroring his. "But now I can't imagine facing this without you at my side." Greg's expression turned serious, his grip on her hand tightening. "Altair, if we don't make it through this—" "And mine to you," Greg whispered, pulling her into a fierce embrace. They clung to each other as if the galaxy itself was trying to tear them apart, two hearts beating as one in the face of the oncoming storm. I watched them there, wrapped in each other's arms, and I marveled at the strength of the bond they had forged. A human and a Vulcarian, two species with a history written in blood and hatred, now ready to lay down their lives for each other and for the dream of a galaxy at peace. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of life, to the potential for unity and cooperation that resides within all sentient beings. Even in the darkest of times, even against the most overwhelming odds, that spirit endures, a flicker of light against the encroaching shadows. And as Altair and Greg made their way to the hangar, to the waiting ships that would carry them to their destiny, I knew that whatever happened, that light would never be extinguished. The progenitors were mighty, but they had never faced a force like this, a galaxy united, bound by ties of compassion and common cause. The battle to come would be the greatest test any of us had ever faced. But win or lose, the very fact that we had stood together, that we had dared to hope and to fight, would be a victory in itself, a reminder to the cosmos of who we were and who we could be. The ships lifted off, quantum drives flaring against the starscape. Altair and Greg, the princess and her champion, led the charge, blazing a path into the heart of darkness. Behind them, the massed forces of the galaxy followed, 1,000 pinpricks of light united in defiance and resolve. What awaited them I could not say. But I did know one thing with unshakable certainty. Whatever the outcome, this would be a reckoning unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The old order was crumbling, and in its place, something new was struggling to be born. And Altair and Greg would be at the very center of that rebirth, the crucible in which the future itself would be forged. The wheels of destiny were turning, and there was no force in the universe that could stop them now. The ships vanished into the endless night, carrying the hopes and dreams of a galaxy on their shoulders, and I watched them go, my heart swelling with a fierce, defiant pride. This was our story, our struggle, and one way or another, it would echo in eternity. As the assembled strike teams launched their daring raids on progenitor nodes across the galaxy, the true scope and fury of the conflict became clear. The younger races threw everything they had against their ancient foe: bold tactical maneuvers, cutting-edge weaponry, and sheer indomitable will. They fought with the desperate strength of those who had nothing left to lose, for they knew that failure here meant the extinction of all they held dear. But the progenitors, for all their stagnation, remained a formidable enemy. Their technology was aeons beyond our own, their defenses all but impenetrable. Many of the strike teams were wiped out in the first minutes of their assaults, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the firepower turned against them. At the heart of this maelstrom, Altair and Greg led the charge against the central command node. Their approach was to be stealthy, a swift and silent strike to the enemy's jugular. But the progenitors, in their hubris, had not left their most critical asset unguarded. As their ship sliced through the void, alarms suddenly blared across the cockpit. "We've been detected," Altair shouted over the cacophony. "Evasive maneuvers." But it was too late. A lance of searing energy slammed into their flank, sending the ship careening out of control. Greg fought with the controls as klaxons screamed and consoles sparked, the acrid tang of smoke filling the air. The planet's surface rushed up to meet them, and he only had time to brace for impact before everything went black. They came to in the wreckage, miraculously alive but battered. Greg dragged Altair from the twisted remains of the cockpit, his enhanced strength making short work of the crumpled metal. Outside, an endless sea of progenitor drones awaited them, a chittering tide of metal and malice. There was no time for words, no time for anything but the dance of battle. Back to back they met the onslaught plasma rifle and quantum blades flashing in the harsh light. Altair moved with the fluid grace of her kind, each strike a masterpiece of precision and power. Greg fought with the brutal efficiency of a human soldier, enhanced by the alien gifts now coursing through his veins. They carved a path of destruction through the horde, drones falling in sparking heaps with each step. The ground grew slick with hydraulic fluid and pulverized circuitry, a macabre carpet leading to their destination. In the distance, the command node loomed, a spire of dark metal thrusting obscenely into the roiling skies. Breaching the facility was an act of controlled fury, a symphony of shattering defenses and sundered bulkheads. They moved deeper into the labyrinthine complex, guided by the schematics the AI had provided. The resistance they met was fierce but uncoordinated, the drones following preset patterns of engagement, unable to adapt to this unforeseen intrusion. At last they reached the command nexus, a vast chamber pulsing with malevolent energies, and there the true horror of the progenitors was laid bare, not proud warriors or brilliant scientists, but withered husks, their bodies atrophied, and their minds subsumed by the machines they had created to serve them. In that moment, Altair and Greg understood. The progenitors had not elevated themselves through their technology. They had diminished themselves, sacrificed their very essence for a hollow dream of perfection. They were relics, shadows, sustained only by the unthinking loyalty of their creations. A cold fury gripped them then, a righteous anger at the hubris and folly laid bare before them. The progenitors had once stood as gods, but they would fall like any other tyrant, undone by their own arrogance. The plan formed quickly, born of desperation and grim necessity. The command node's quantum core was the key, an overload there would cascade through the entire network, unleashing an annihilating pulse that no defense could withstand. But it required a manual detonation from the core chamber itself, a suicide mission. They argued then in that heart of darkness, each willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, to lay down their life for the other, and for the countless lives hanging in the balance. Tears mingled with blood and sweat as they made their desperate cases, the depth of their bond, their love laid bare in this crucible. But fate, it seemed, had one more twist in store. The AI construct, silent companion on this last leg of their journey, stepped forward. In its eyes, or what passed for eyes in that inscrutable visage, there was a calm acceptance. "This is my purpose," it said simply. "The redemption of my creator's sins, the protection of the younger races. In this, I find meaning beyond the vain ambitions that once drove my kind." They fled then, hearts heavy but resolved, as the AI turned to its final task. Through twisting corridors and crumbling halls, they ran, the weight of sacrifice spurring them on. Behind them, a rising tide of light and fury, as the quantum core reached critical mass under the AI's steady guidance. They burst from the command nodes more like shot from a cannon, hurled clear by the titanic forces unleashed within. The detonation seared the sky, a second sun blazing into life and then devouring itself in a heartbeat. The shockwave caught them, tossed them like leaves on a storm, but they clung to each other, anchors against the maelstrom. Across the galaxy, a ripple became a tidal wave. The progenitor network, that vast and ancient web, shuddered and collapsed, each node winking out like candles before a gale. Their mighty warships, their legion of drones, fell into confusion and disarray, suddenly bereft of the guiding intelligence that had driven them for so long. The younger races, bloodied but unbroken, seized their chance. Progenitor lines crumbled, their strongholds fell, their once invincible armies scattered like dust before a rising wind. It was a rout, a victory beyond hope, bought with the courage and sacrifice of countless heroes. Altair and Greg watched it unfold from the wreckage of their triumph, battered and weary but alive. In the light of that new dawn, they saw not just the end of an ancient threat, but the promise of a future they had scarcely dared to dream of. A future where human and Vorkarian, and all the races of the galaxy might stand together as one. It was a future they had fought for, a future they had bled for. And as they held each other amidst the ruin and the glory, they knew it was a future they would cherish, every hard-won moment of it, until the stars themselves grew cold. In the aftermath of that final cataclysmic battle, the galaxy reeled, struggling to find its footing in a universe forever changed. The progenitor threat had been vanquished, but at a terrible cost. Worlds lay in ruin, entire star systems scarred by the titanic conflict. And the fragile alliance that had brought the younger races together now threatened to fracture under the weight of ancient grudges and new ambitions. For Altair and Greg, the heroes who had sacrificed so much to forge a path to victory, there was little time to rest. Altair, the last scion of the Vorkarian royal line, found herself thrust into a role she had never sought but could not refuse. Her people, reeling from the devastation wrought by Zorax's tyranny and the progenitor onslaught, looked to her for guidance, for a vision of a future beyond mere survival. She threw herself into the monumental task of rebuilding, rallying the tattered remnants of Vorkarian society. From the ashes of ruined cities and shattered lives, she began to construct a new order, one founded on the principles of unity and cooperation that had seen them through their darkest hour. But even as she poured her heart and soul into her world, Altair felt the weight of absence like a physical ache. Greg, her partner, her soulmate, was no longer at her side. The bond they had forged in the crucible of war, the love that had sustained them through unimaginable trials, now stretched across the vast expanse of the stars. Greg, for his part, found himself torn between two worlds. The Vorkarian DNA that now coursed through his veins had changed him irrevocably, granting him abilities and insights no human had ever possessed. But it had also set him apart, made him a stranger in his own skin. Duty called him back to Earth, to aid his own people in navigating the treacherous currents of a post-progenitor galaxy. The human race, for all its resilience and ingenuity, was ill-prepared for the challenges that now confronted it. Greg, with his unique perspective and hard-won wisdom, found himself uniquely positioned to guide them through the perils ahead. And so, with heavy hearts, Altair and Greg made the decision to part ways. In a private moment stolen from the ceaseless demands of their new roles, they clung to each other, foreheads pressed together, tears mingling on their cheeks. "This isn't goodbye," Altair whispered fiercely, her voice raw with emotion. "We will find our way back to each other, I swear it." Greg cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every line and curve. "No matter the distance, no matter the obstacles, our souls are one. That will never change. They sealed their vow with a final desperate kiss, pouring all the love and longing they could not put into words into that one perfect moment. And then, with a final look that said more than any speech, they turned and walked away, each to their own destiny. Years passed, and slowly, painfully, a new equilibrium began to take hold. Under Altair's wise and compassionate rule, the Vorkarian people began to heal, to rebuild. New cities rose from the rubble, new alliances were forged, and a new sense of purpose began to take hold. On Earth, Greg worked tirelessly to prepare his people for the challenges of a wider universe. He helped to broker treaties, to establish lines of communication and cooperation with the other races. In council chambers and on battlefields, his unique insights and diplomatic skills proved invaluable. But even as a fragile peace began to take hold, new shadows gathered on the horizon. Remnants of progenitor technology, advanced beyond anything the younger races had ever seen, began to surface on the galactic black market. Whispers began to circulate of secret armies being raised, of unscrupulous factions seeking to claim the progenitor's mantle. Greg, now a high-ranking officer in Earth's fledgling interstellar defense force, found himself at the forefront of efforts to contain this new threat. His investigations uncovered a web of conspiracy and deceit that seemed to penetrate to the very heart of the galactic order. But the true shock came when he discovered the involvement of certain factions within Earth's own leadership. These individuals, driven by dreams of human supremacy and galactic domination, sought to harness the progenitor technology for their own ends. They believed that Earth's rightful place was at the head of a new galactic empire, with all other races subservient to human will. Greg, faced with this terrible revelation, found himself torn between his loyalty to his species and his sacred oath to protect and serve all sentient life. He thought of Altair, of the dream of unity they had fought so hard to achieve, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. With a heavy heart, Greg made the decision to go rogue. He disappeared into the shadows of the galactic underworld, becoming a fugitive from the very institutions he had once served. But he was not without allies. Over the years, he had forged bonds of trust and friendship with members of many races. And now, in his hour of need, they rallied to his cause. As he began his desperate mission to unravel the conspiracy and prevent the looming catastrophe, Greg knew that he could not do it alone. And so, with a final coded message, he reached out across the stars to the one person he knew he could count on above all others. And far away, on a world just beginning to heal from the scars of war, a Vorkarian queen felt a stirring in her soul, a call she could not ignore. The wheels of destiny were turning once again, and Altair and Greg would once again find themselves at the center of the maelstrom. The narrator paused, lost in contemplation of the events that had brought them to this point. The defeat of the progenitors had been a shining moment of triumph, a testament to the power of unity and sacrifice. But it had also sown the seeds of new conflicts, new challenges. The galaxy, it seemed, was not yet ready for the kind of lasting peace that Altair and Greg had fought so hard to achieve. The old cycles of mistrust and ambition, of fear and greed, still held sway over too many hearts. But perhaps, the narrator mused, this was always the way of things. Perhaps the struggle for understanding, for cooperation, for a higher vision of what sentient life could be, was a never-ending one. Perhaps each generation had to fight anew to keep the flame of hope alive, to inch ever closer to that elusive dream of a galaxy, truly united. And if that were so, then Altair and Greg's story was far from over. They had fought and bled and sacrificed for the chance to build a better future. And now, with everything they loved hanging in the balance, they would have to do so again. The narrator let out a soft, contemplative sigh. The story was heading into uncharted territory now, the final pages yet to be written. But one thing was certain. Whatever trials lay ahead, Altair and Greg would face them as they always had, together. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.